Okay, so welcome to the tutorial for depth of field, and today I will be guiding you on how to add a blur to the background or the foreground in a picture like this. Although the tutorial is made for depth of field, the first method I'll show you is applicable to any effect in Resolve, such as color correction. The second method gives you more freedom in where to add depth of field, so I'd make sure to stick around for that too. Now before getting into the Resolve tutorial, you're going to need two things: a cinematic, its depth map, and prior fusion knowledge, although optional. The depth map may be obtained by re-rendering the cinematic using a depth map shader, which has various different ranges. Check out CrushedPixel's depth map video for more details, and hopefully you'll get what I mean. Also, just in case you haven't already, make sure to set up your project settings by pressing Shift 9 and changing any parameters to fit with what you're editing. So first of all, what you want to do is you want to right click, Timeline, Create New Timeline. Then you press Create. Add a fusion composition, and you can find that when you go to Effects, Fusion Composition. We want to open this up and work with this in the Fusion environment. The first thing you're probably going to see is this media out and this blank screen. This is how it's meant to look. What you have to do now is import a few things into Fusion. So first of all, we're going to import the clip by just dragging it down from the media pool. If your media pool isn't open, you can press the media pool tab, which opens it here in order to open it. You want to press this square here at the end, and you want to drag it all the way over here. That puts it in the media out, which is what we'll show on the outside in the edit tab. So now that we've done that, we want to bring in our depth of field clip, or our depth map as it's called. Once you bring that in, you can press the number 1 or 2 in order to show it on each of these displays. What you want to do, you want to press Shift tab and search for a blur. So once you have a blur in, you just want to increase the blur size over here in the inspector tab until it's like decently blurred. Now you're probably wondering, well, this just blurs the whole thing. How am I going to use this in order to make it only blur particular parts? Well, that's where a node called the Bitmap node comes in. The Bitmap node is a useful one, which can convert any input it has from the yellow arrow into a mask going into the blue arrow of another node. It's basically a pair of scissors for Resolve to handle. Plug in your depth map into the bitmap, into the orange or yellow triangle, and then you plug that one in to the blue triangle of your blur. So once we come into here, we want to go into the inspector. We want to change channel to luminance, and then we can see, okay, now it looks like the bitmap is the depth map. We went from white in alpha to the depth map in luminance. And now if you look at the blur only affects areas that are white on the mask. If you look at the white space here, that's where you notice there's a large amount of blur. If you look here, that's where there's quite a bit of blur because there's a gray area here. And if I go to my character over here, and you can notice none of his features are really blurred because he's in a dark area. Another tip in order to enhance the way it works more is by using levels. So what you want to do, you want to press Shift space and you want to type in brightness/contrast, or just brightness, and then press enter or add. Once you've added that before the mask and after the depth map, from here you can play along with the levels. So here's me playing along with the levels, and I can drag it all the way back here and drag this all the way here and just continue dragging it a bit more in order to change the way it affects the blur node. So now, as you can see, instead of blurring it in different levels as it did before, it simply just blurs all of the background and leaves me in focus. Finally, if you want to quickly change if the depth map affects the background or the foreground, you can go into the mask and press the invert button. And by pressing invert, it now affects the foreground and not the background. Okay, now we move on to the second method, which is a little harder than the previous, but lets you get more creative with where your focus would be. So once again, I start off with the cinematic connected to the media out and the depth map not connected to anything. So what we want to do, we want to add a channel boolean with an S. Then we want to add a depth blur. So as you can probably tell, the depth blur is what actually causes us to get depth of field. The channel booleans node adds channels to your media, allowing other nodes to interact with it. It's like injecting a depth map into a cinematic and telling other nodes that this contains a depth map. So what you want to do first, you want to go to the channel boolean, go to the inspector tab, go to the AUX tab in the inspector tab, tick enable extra channel, go to 2Z buffer, and Z buffer, which refers to a Z map, is another name for depth in general. And you want to go to lightness background. You can probably assume that this lightness refers to black and white, and it's going from black to white. You can connect your depth map into the channel boolean. And as you can see, now everything goes black and white. All you have to do is press Ctrl T in order to switch them. The reason why it went black and white is because the depth map was in the foreground and the clip was in the background. So you want to flip it around basically, which is by swapping inputs, Ctrl T. And by doing so, you basically say, oh, this is the channel I want to add to this. So now that we've added this channel, we can come to the depth blur. In the inspector tab, you see how it says blur channel Z? Well, because we've added a Z channel in the channel booleans, we can now work with that basically. So what I usually like to do, I bring the Z scale down to 0. I bring this blur side up to 10, and then it gets really blurry. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And once I've done that, I want to then play around with the Z scale by increasing it by increments of 0.1 preferably, until you blur out what you don't want and you have in focus what you do want. And once you have something similar like this, you might want to increase your depth of field by increments of 0.01, slowly until you get something where the main thing you want to focus on is in focus and what you don't want to focus on is non-focus. But then, okay, mix, this is cool and all, but how is this any different from the other method? Well, if you bring up the depth map and you put it in one of the views and you come to the depth blur node, you can press on this sample, which changes the focal point, and you can drag it to any point on your cinematic, and then it changes where the depth map will focus. So if I want to make high pixel, for example, the main focus, I can do so by bringing my sample all the way to high pixel, and that way everything else other than that gets blurred. So that's how you use depth maps and do depth of field in DaVinci Resolve. I hope this helped you out in some way or form, and make sure to ask any questions you have on Discord or in the comment section. If you'd like to see my depth of field in action, check out some of my Minecraft edits over there, which are also edited in Resolve. For now, see ya!